A buffet restaurant that was once a part of everyday American life recently closed its doors forever. The steam trays that used to be refilled every few minutes now sit cold and empty, and the dining room that once couldn't fit another table on a weekend now sits completely dark. Across the country, something is quietly happening to the American buffet, and it's not just closures. Some of the chains that are still open right now have inspection records that would stop you from ever walking through their doors again. Dead roaches, rodent droppings, food sitting at dangerous temperatures while hundreds of people pile their plates without knowing any of it. And today we are looking at 12 buffet chains you need to know about, 8 that you should never eat at, and 4 that are actually safe. Let's get into it. Golden Corral. Golden Corral was for a very long time the buffet that felt completely untouchable. The carved meats, the legendary bread pudding, the chocolate fountain that kids treated like a destination all on its own. For millions of American families, Sunday dinner at Golden Corral wasn't just a meal. It was a ritual. But in October 2025, health inspectors walked into the Golden Corral in Palm Bay, Florida, and found one dead roach on the premises and nearly 40 rodent droppings scattered across the kitchen. The location was shut down on the spot. And that wasn't an isolated incident. Golden Corral's largest franchise operator filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with $49.7 million in debt, and only 6 of its 33 locations still open. Another franchisee filed in early 2025, listing just $150,000 in assets against $1.64 million in debt. The closures are happening quietly across multiple states, and the Sunday afternoon ritual that felt permanent is disappearing one location at a time. Cicis Pizza. For a certain generation of American kids, Cicis Pizza was an event. Unlimited pizza for a price that felt almost too good to be true. Endless slices under warming lights in a dining room that was always louder than it probably should have been. But inspectors at a Springfield, Missouri location found the dish machine running at 0 parts per million of sanitizer when the required level is 50 to 100. The same inspection found a scoop sitting handle down in ready-to-eat pasta salad and improper employee drinks throughout the kitchen. A Florida location was flagged for roach activity, with 3 high-priority violations in a single visit. In 2021, the chain filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The unlimited pizza that once seemed like it would always be there eventually wasn't. Hometown buffet. There was a version of the Sunday afternoon that a lot of families knew very well. The whole family in the car. A parking lot that was always busier than you expected. And hometown buffet waiting at the end of it. A warm dining room. Affordable prices. Enough variety that nobody had to compromise. But 2 South Bay locations were shut down abruptly after county inspectors confirmed rodent and pest activity on the premises. A Salem, Oregon location scored an 80 on its health inspection, with multiple priority violations including improperly held cooked food at hazardous temperatures. The parent company filed for bankruptcy in 2008, then again in 2016. When the pandemic hit in 2020, a buffet that couldn't do takeout had nothing left to fall back on. By 2021, the Sunday afternoon ritual was permanently over. Ponderosa Steakhouse. At its peak, Ponderosa Steakhouse had nearly 700 locations across the United States. An affordable steak dinner alongside a buffet of sides that let the whole family eat well without straining the budget. For families across the Midwest and the South, it was the answer to where to go for a special dinner that didn't require a special occasion budget. But documented inspection reports pulled from state health databases show temperature violations and sanitation failures across multiple locations in multiple states. The chain that once operated 700 restaurants spent the decades since in a long and painful contraction. Bankruptcy filings came and went. The footprint shrank from hundreds of locations to dozens to just a small handful scattered across a few remaining states. What's left today feels less like a thriving chain and more like the final few survivors of something that once covered the entire country. Furr's Fresh Buffet. Furr's had been feeding families across the American Southwest since 1946. Generations of families who grew up moving through those cafeteria lines eventually brought their own children through the same ones. The concept was simple. You moved through the line. You pointed at what you wanted. You sat down to a meal that felt genuinely homemade. But Furr spent its final years in a constant state of financial difficulty. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in February 2014. It was sold and rebranded as Furr's Fresh Buffet, but the underlying problems never went away. Rising costs. Changing habits, competition that felt more current. On April 21, 2021, the parent company Fresh Acquisitions filed for bankruptcy, and every remaining Furr's location was permanently closed. A cafeteria chain that had survived 75 years through recessions and industry shifts finally ran out of runway. Some institutions feel permanent right up until the day they aren't. Stevie B's Pizza Buffet. Stevie B's Pizza Buffet was built around an idea that families across the South found genuinely appealing for years. Unlimited pizza for a price that made it easy to say yes without thinking too hard about the bill. A dining room that welcomed large groups and loud tables and kids who wanted 3 different slices of 3 different kinds of pizza without anyone keeping track. The concept spread across Georgia, Florida, and surrounding states, and for a long time it filled a specific need in those communities. A place where you could bring the whole table and nobody had to negotiate over what to order. But the inspection records attached to several Stevie B's locations started telling a different story. At one location, inspectors documented employees failing to wash hands before handling clean dishes. At another location, improper food storage was noted across multiple separate visits, meaning the problem wasn't corrected after the first time it was flagged. Employee health documentation that health codes require every food service operation to maintain was found to be missing at multiple sites. These aren't the kind of violations that make headlines. They are the quiet kind, the kind that build up slowly in locations where daily standards begin to slip, and nobody catches it until an inspector walks through the door with a clipboard. The challenge with the buffet model specifically is that the margin for error is smaller than most customers realize. Food sitting in open trays at the wrong temperature for even a short period of time creates a risk that doesn't exist in the same way in a kitchen turning out individual plated orders. A buffet line during a busy lunch rush involves dozens of trays, constant restocking, and staff managing multiple stations simultaneously. When the operational discipline needed to maintain that safely starts to erode, the consequences don't stay behind the counter. What makes the Stevie B's story particularly worth noting is that many of the violations documented weren't dramatic single events, they were patterns. The same issues appearing across different locations in different states, suggesting that the standards being applied weren't consistent across the brand. That kind of systemic inconsistency is harder to fix than a single bad inspection at a single location, because it points to something structural rather than something isolated. The pizza buffet that once felt like a reliable neighborhood option in communities across the South gradually became something customers couldn't fully trust without knowing what the most recent inspection had found. And for most people walking through the door on a Tuesday afternoon, that information was never visible. It was sitting in a database somewhere that nobody thought to check before they picked up a plate. Bonanza Steakhouse. Bonanza Steakhouse was once a genuine fixture across large parts of the United States. The same affordable steak dinner that Ponderosa was offering in the Midwest and South Bonanza was delivering to families in the Northeast and parts of the Mid-Atlantic for decades. One flat price. A real piece of beef cooked to order. A buffet line generous enough with sides and salads that nobody at the table was going to leave hungry. For working families who wanted a sit-down dinner that felt like a real occasion, without the stress of a bill that would ruin the evening, Bonanza filled that role reliably for years. But the cracks started appearing long before the final closures came. A Reno, Nevada location closed in December 2015 after the city repeatedly cited it for code violations. The closures that followed across other states happened with very little public notice. Locations that had been community staples for decades simply stopped being there one day. No dramatic announcement, no farewell weekend. Just a dark dining room and a sign on the door and a parking lot that gradually got repurposed for something else. The parent company that owned both Bonanza and Ponderosa went through multiple rounds of financial restructuring over the years, and each restructuring left fewer locations standing than the one before. The casual dining chains that were expanding aggressively during the same period offered a more modern atmosphere and a broader menu, and an experience that felt more current and more worth the money to a generation of diners who hadn't grown up with the steakhouse buffet as their reference point for a good dinner out. What made Bonanza's decline particularly quiet was that it happened gradually enough that most people didn't register it as a loss until it was already complete. You don't notice a chain disappearing when it loses 3 locations this year and 4 locations next year across states you don't live in. You only notice when you try to remember the last time you actually saw one and realize it has been years, and you never consciously decided to stop going. You just stopped having a reason to go back, because there was nowhere left to go back to. The states that once had a dozen Bonanza locations eventually had 2, then 1, then none. And by the time that happened, most people had already moved on to somewhere else without ever saying goodbye to a place that had fed their families for decades. That's the particular kind of loss that's hardest to grieve. The kind that happens so slowly you don't realize it's a loss until it's already finished. Ryan's Buffet. Ryan's buffet ended the way a lot of things end when a company runs out of options completely. Not with a planned wind down, not with a farewell promotion or a final weekend of discounted meals. With signs on doors. Employees across multiple states showed up for their scheduled shifts and found notices posted at the entrance, telling them to clock out and leave. The parent company Buffett's LLC had been operating in financial distress for years, and when the end finally came, it came without warning for the people who worked there and the communities that had made Ryan's a regular part of their week. At its peak, Ryan's was everywhere across the South and Midwest. Massive dining rooms with long buffet lines stacked with carved meats, fresh-baked rolls, and dessert options that kept kids at the table long after everyone else had finished eating. The chain built its reputation on the idea that a family could walk in hungry and walk out completely satisfied without spending a lot of money doing it. For communities across those regions, Ryan's wasn't just a restaurant. It was the answer to where you went when the family needed to eat, and nobody wanted to argue about where to go. But the financial pressures had been building for years before the final closure. The parent company filed for bankruptcy multiple times across a span of more than a decade. Each filing resulted in more locations closing and a smaller footprint than before. The buffet model that had seemed so appealing in the 1990s was increasingly difficult to sustain as food costs rose, and the margins that had once made the all-you-can-eat format profitable got thinner with every passing year. Documented food temperature violations and cross-contamination findings appeared in inspection records across multiple Ryan's locations in the years before the final closure. The operational strain of maintaining a large-scale buffet at declining price points with thinning staff and aging equipment showed up not just in the financial filings but in the inspection reports that most customers never thought to look at. As of January 15, 2021, every remaining Ryan's location was permanently closed. Properties that had fed communities for decades were auctioned off. The dining rooms sat empty. For the people who had built their Friday evening routines around a Ryan's that was within driving distance, the closure felt sudden even though anyone paying attention to the financials would have seen it coming for years. A buffet line that once couldn't seat everyone who showed up was simply gone, and the communities it had served for decades had nowhere left to go back to. Captain George's Seafood. Captain George's Seafood is the kind of restaurant that makes you understand what the buffet format was always supposed to be before the corners started getting cut. Located in Virginia Beach and Kill Devil Hills in North Carolina, Captain George's has been operating since 1975 and has built a reputation over 5 decades that the chains on the first half of this list spent years trying and failing to maintain. The seafood buffet here is not an afterthought. It is the entire point of the operation, and the quality reflects that. The inspection record at Captain George's stands in direct contrast to what state health databases show for the chains documented earlier in this video. Customers who have eaten here consistently describe a dining room that is visibly clean and professionally maintained. The seafood is fresh in a way that buffet seafood rarely is. The service operates with the kind of attentiveness that suggests the staff is actually invested in the experience rather than just moving through a shift. That combination of things is rarer than it should be in the buffet category, and it is exactly why Captain George's has survived for more than 50 years, while chains with hundreds of locations have disappeared entirely. What makes Captain George's worth highlighting specifically is that it disproves the idea that the buffet format is inherently incompatible with quality and food safety. The format itself is not the problem. The problem is what happens when a chain prioritizes volume and cost-cutting over the operational discipline required to run a buffet safely and well. Captain George's never made that trade, and the result is a restaurant that 5 decades later is still worth driving to. Cicis de Brazil. Cicis de Brazil operates on a model that looks like a buffet from a distance but functions entirely differently in terms of food safety and quality control the moment you understand how the kitchen actually works. The Brazilian churrascaria format means that the protein, and there is a great deal of it, comes to your table continuously sliced tableside from skewers by servers who are moving through the dining room throughout the entire meal. Nothing sits in an open tray under a warming light waiting for the next customer to walk through the line. Nothing is handled by dozens of strangers before it reaches your plate. The meat that lands in front of you was carved from a skewer seconds ago by a trained server who has been doing this all evening and who will be back at your table before you finish what is already in front of you. That distinction matters more than most people realize when they sit down for the first time and start comparing it to the buffet chains they grew up eating at. The structural risk factors that show up repeatedly in state health inspection databases for traditional buffet operations simply do not exist in the same form here. At a traditional buffet, the danger is constant, and it is everywhere at once. Food sitting at temperatures that drift out of the safe zone during a busy Saturday lunch. Shared serving utensils touched by every hand that moves through the line over the course of several hours. Open trays exposed to the dining room environment long before the food inside them ever reaches a plate. Cicis de Brazil eliminates most of those risk points by design before a single customer walks through the door. The health inspection record at Cicis de Brazil locations across multiple states reflects the operational discipline that the format demands and that the price point makes possible to maintain. The cost of dining here is significantly higher than a traditional buffet, and that difference is not just visible in the quality of the meat on the skewer. It is visible in the staffing levels that keep the dining room running properly. It is visible in the training standards applied to every person working the floor, and it is visible in the way the salad bar and sides component is maintained to the same standard as the rest of the operation, rather than being treated as the part of the meal that gets less attention when things get busy. The model does not rely on customers serving themselves from shared stations that require constant monitoring to maintain safe temperatures and prevent cross-contamination. That single structural difference between Cicis de Brazil and the chains documented earlier in this video accounts for a significant portion of why one category keeps appearing in health inspection reports and the other does not. For anyone who wants the abundance and variety that the all-you-can-eat format promises without the food safety concerns that the inspection records of chains like Golden Corral and Cicis make impossible to ignore, Cicis de Brazil represents exactly what the category looks like when the people running it never cut the corners that the cheaper operations cut every single day. Fogo de Chão. Fogo de Chão has been perfecting the art of Brazilian churrasco since 1979, and the inspection record reflects an operation that takes food safety as seriously as it takes the quality of the meat it serves. That combination is rarer than it should be in the restaurant industry, and it is almost unheard of in a format that operates at the volume and scale that Fogo de Chão does across its locations nationwide. A December 2025 inspection at a New York location recorded 0 violations, not a reduced score. Not a passing grade with minor notes attached to it, 0 violations at the time of inspection. That outcome is not common in the restaurant industry at any price point, and it is particularly notable for an operation running a continuous tableside service model across a large dining room handling hundreds of covers in a single evening. The churrascaria format that Fogo de Chão brought to the American market and helped establish as a genuine dining category removes most of the structural risk factors that make traditional buffets the kind of environment that shows up repeatedly in state health inspection databases. At a traditional buffet, the danger points are everywhere, and they are constant. Open trays sitting at temperatures that drift out of the safe zone during a busy rush. Shared serving utensils handled by every person who moves through the line. Food that has been exposed to the dining room environment for extended periods before it ever reaches a plate. At Fogo de Chão, almost none of those risk factors exist in the same form. The protein comes to your table continuously sliced tableside, from skewers by servers who are moving through the dining room throughout the entire meal. Nothing sits in an open tray under a warming light waiting for the next person to arrive. Nothing is handled by dozens of strangers before it reaches your plate. The meat that lands in front of you was on a skewer 30 seconds ago, and before that it was rotating over a live fire in a kitchen, operating to standards that the inspection record confirms are being maintained consistently. The salad and sides component is managed to the same standard as the rest of the operation, rather than being treated as the secondary concern it becomes at chains where cost pressure forces attention away from the parts of the meal that feel less important. At Fogo de Chão, there are no parts of the meal that feel less important. The entire operation runs at the same level from the fire to the table. The result is a dining experience that delivers everything the all-you-can-eat format has always promised. Abundance, variety, the feeling of genuine value for what you are spending. Without the inspection records that should make anyone think twice before picking up a plate at the chains that opened this video. This is what the format looks like when the people running it never stopped caring about getting it right. So plantation / sweet tomatoes, so plantation on the West Coast. Sweet tomatoes everywhere else. Two names for the same idea. A buffet built entirely around fresh food at a time when most buffet restaurants were associated with heavy steam trays and reheated dishes that had been sitting under warming lights since the morning rush. Freshly made soups that changed with the season. Salads built from produce that actually looked like it had been handled with care by someone who understood the difference between fresh and acceptable. Warm muffins pulled from the oven throughout the day so that by the time they reached your tray, they were still soft in the middle. For customers who wanted to eat well without spending a lot of money, So Plantation and Sweet Tomatoes offered something that almost nothing else in the buffet category was offering at the time: The loyal following they built didn't come from habit the way a lot of buffet regulars developed their routines. It came from genuine appreciation. Customers who cared about what they were eating found a buffet format that actually respected that. Parents who wanted to feed their kids something that resembled real food rather than reheated steam tray selections found exactly what they were looking for here. And the health-conscious diner who had written off the buffet category entirely found a reason to reconsider. That combination of customers built a base that kept 97 locations running and profitable for decades. The inspection record at So Plantation and Sweet Tomatoes reflected the care that went into the operation from the kitchen outward. A brand built around fresh ingredients and a health-conscious customer base had strong structural incentives to maintain food safety standards that the value-oriented chains earlier in this video never prioritized in the same way. When your entire identity is built around fresh, clean food, your inspection record either confirms that identity or destroys it. So Plantation's record confirmed it consistently across locations and across years. That consistency is rarer than it sounds in a large multi-location buffet operation. The pandemic ended Sweet Tomatoes not because of violations or financial mismanagement or a broken promise to the customer. It ended because the salad bar itself, the very thing that made the brand what it was, became the reason it couldn't reopen. Public health guidance made self-service shared food stations impossible to operate responsibly, and there was no version of So Plantation that worked without them. On May 7, 2020, all 97 locations were permanently closed. The parent company, Garden Fresh Restaurant Corporation, filed for liquidation. 4,400 employees lost their jobs in a matter of weeks. What makes Sweet Tomatoes the right place to end this list is that it represents everything the buffet format was supposed to be. Fresh food, clean operations, a genuine promise to the customer kept consistently for decades. It was still taken away, and that makes its absence feel completely different from every closure that came before it on this list. The others were cautionary tales. This one was just a loss. Looking at all 12 of these buffet chains together, the most interesting thing isn't the violations or the closures. It's the pattern underneath all of it. The chains that cut corners on the things customers couldn't see eventually lost the customers who trusted them. And the ones that never cut those corners are still standing. Which one of these buffet chains do you actually remember visiting? Drop it in the comments below. I read through all of them, and your memories have a way of shaping what comes next.